everybody, and welcome to our 11th episode of our podcast, Cybersecurity in Business. It is a huge pleasure for me to do. I think it's our third episode in English and eighth in Bulgarian. We want to mix and create a diverse content for people who are listening in Bulgaria mainly, but also I think that the guests who are coming have a lot to bring to the table, and not only for our Bulgarian listeners, but also people who are listening outside of our country. Moving on, our next episode will include someone who was um, part of the work that we do. We actually hosted an event focused on ICS, industrial cybersecurity, and or OT security, and our guest was kind enough um, to participate with a video lecture on the topic of introduction to OT security. And now I would have the pleasure to introduce John Kingsley. John, welcome to our episode. Could you please introduce yourself, tell a little bit more about who are you, what do you do, and just to give a brief overview of who you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgeny. I think it's really good to be here, join with you in your podcast. And thanks for inviting me today, as well as the previous chance during the cybersecurity conference that you did in Bulgaria. Hopefully, I travel someday in person. So about me,
Yes.
I'm an electronics and instrumentation engineer. I have done my masters in digital manufacturing. So I have around 17 years of overall experience in steel manufacturing, oil and gas, marine, and petrochemical, a little bit of consulting, and currently I work in energy domain in Hitachi Energy as a senior product security engineer and also as a cybersecurity engineer, dealing with the solutions for our products. So that's very briefly about me.
Great, thank you. I want to start with the topic in which you specialize, but with a more different approach. Um, I know that you're an engineer, and I told you that most solutions, most how can I say, most attacks, maybe even, and most technology comes from, in terms of OT security, comes from the IT side. And we do not see so many engineers, at least I think in Europe, and in the product development of such technologies and solutions into OT security. Why do you think this is? Why do you think that, and how could it change? And what is the difference? Mainly, the question is, what is the difference in the engineering approach and in the IT approach to the problem of industrial cybersecurity?
Right. So I think this is a very loaded question. That there are many angles to this, but to give you a very brief background, um, of course, IT cybersecurity or IT security or info security, as we all know, has been around for a while, and it's a very matured industry, to be really honest about it. But when we talk about OT systems, or uh, more specifically known as industrial control system or automation systems, uh, even though they have been there for a very long time, the security for such critical infrastructure uh, is becoming more relevant of recently, maybe last 10 years, since there was many famous cyber attacks on different industry sectors. So uh, the concept of security is still the same, but there are certain constraints and challenges in how you apply, right? And one thing that commonly crops up is IT versus OT. What is the difference? And we always say CIA for IT. It could be it is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, where the data safety is more important in terms of um, uh, like uh, falling into the wrong hands and so on because of sensitive information and so on, or maybe trade secret. But when we talk about OT, it is more on the availability, the safety, and so on. Of course, people may say AIC or CIA. Ultimately, it's about the availability, its integrity, and its safety. And uh, even though the focus on cybersecurity for OT systems is quite recent, uh, when we talk about such critical infrastructures or OT systems, uh, the safety has always been there for a while, right? And there are various hazards that might occur in the operating plant, the manufacturing facility, and uh, for them, they have been dealing with all kind of issues for a very long time, and cyber related incidents is just another hazard. So there is already certain way of doing engineering in terms of safety, and those concepts and principles can be applied here as well. And like I mentioned, when I compared about IT versus OT, the thing that we need to understand is the safety of the humans working in the facility. That is always given the primary importance. Then the next thing is the safety of the operating equipment itself. The reason why I stress on these two aspects is simply because you cannot do a reboot or install a patch just like that, like how we do at IT, right? Like for us, 2 or 3 seconds or maybe minutes in an IT world might be fine, but the same is not applicable in the OT world. So, so this is a fundamental difference. Of course, we can go into more details in that, but this is the reason why the approach for the solutions in terms of IT and OT are different.
I think that this is a very vital difference, and thank you for giving such an elaborate answer, because it is really a fundamental difference in the way you approach the subject. Right. So you said that availability is key, and you cannot just patch something. So how do you do it? How do you protect the OT? I know this is a gigantic topic, but if you could narrow it down to 4 5 maybe steps which a company could do, or a consultancy can help another manufacturer in their way of developing and a protective system. And also, I know that you guys stress, especially in the OT security community, you guys stress that there are fundamental differences when you talk about securing oil and gas, securing electrical grid, and securing manufacturing. Is it such a difference, and what are the steps?
Right. Yeah. So there is no straight answer to this. It is quite subjective to what facility they are working in, and each industry sector has its own requirements, challenges, and there is always a issue or a problem in terms of legacy equipment. When I use the word legacy, it means equipments that are 20, 30 years old. They are already maybe past their lifetime, and they are still in operation with some maintenance or troubleshooting. Like there are systems which use still Windows 95 or Windows 2000 and so on. The thing here is um, patching or upgrades may not be feasible, right? You might need to upgrade the whole system with a new hardware, and it's a very expensive investment, and it may not be feasible or it may not be practical, right? And just because you're not able to patch, you don't basically shut it down, right? Like you don't want to disrupt uh, the whole production process. So basically how they go about is, you only patch only if it is really necessary, and managing effectively, especially for OT systems in the manufacturing, oil and gas, petrochemical, or energy. It's a well defined process, and it always starts with understanding what your assets are, and identifying what the vulnerabilities are, and usually before patching is done, it is tested in a controlled environment. Like, you might have some devices, uh, like a lab or so, where you test it and then you deploy. And ultimately it's about the uh, priority, right? Is it something high priority? Is it a medium priority, or is it a low priority? So normally what happens in OT industry is there is always some kind of planned shutdown or a maintenance, annual or biannual. It depends, right? So during such kind of downtime, these patch management can be done. But before we do that, before we schedule all that, we need to understand the priority of the patches, and we need to test it out in a lab environment. And there are help. It's not something that you have to figure it out on your own. The standard IEC 62443 2-3 talks about patch management, and that's one of the very comprehensive guidelines. It's not a standard yet. It is basically a technical recommendation or a guideline, and it's very comprehensive, and it talks about specifically how you do the patch management for OT systems. So uh, that document will help a lot, and even though it might not be very specific, it still goes a long way. And other thing is, right, like, patching is not the end of it, right? In cases where immediate patching is not feasible due to operational constraints, or the controls, uh, or it's not possible, uh, we can kind of ensure network segmentation or intrusion detection. These kind of controls, uh, mitigation controls or compensating controls, can be employed to reduce the risk that is normally associated with unpatched vulnerabilities, right? And uh, that is just the start of the thing. Of course, um, knowing vulnerability is important. And one thing that I see from my experience is, there are a lot of vulnerabilities that are unpatched, not just legacy systems, but even the more modern systems. Uh, the main reason being they're unaware, right? And exploits for such kind of vulnerabilities is there in the black market. And if you don't do the patching, I think the attacker just, or whoever it is, just needs an access and find a way to get in. And if they know that you have this vulnerability, then again it could be a disaster, right? Like, so the thing is, patch management is one challenge, but knowing what your assets are, and also understanding what vulnerabilities that your assets might have, and what are the fixes that are available from the vendors or the suppliers. And also one has to understand what the attackers do, how they use the exploits. So it's a fine balance. It's a bit of challenge, right? Like vendor coordination, being aware with the what the attackers do, and so on. So there are some challenges, but it's definitely possible. If there is a process like a cybersecurity management system and so on, I think it's definitely possible.
Yeah, I understand. So, from your words, some of the most important things are vulnerability assessment, asset management, network segmentation, just really basic rules, which in effect work.
Right. Right. See, uh, one of the uh, challenges or things that I repeatedly see again and again from my experiences, uh, people always fall for the latest attack or the latest hardware or software. Just by installing it doesn't solve your problem. You need to have trained resources, you need to have process procedures in place, right? And that's the way you're going to prevent it. Just because having some expensive hardware installed doesn't mean that it will protect itself. So this is something that people need to really think about.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So let's move a step after that. What are the potential risks? Why do we need OT security? What could happen? Because we s- we see the effects of IT cyber attacks, and it's pretty common. People know about this, but what are the possible effects of either uh, cyber attack or some sort of misconfiguration? Um, if you could elaborate on that and just give us your thoughts and from your experience, what you see.
Sure. So when we talk about an impact to OT systems, I think um, that the main the reason why we need to be concerned is all these OT systems are available in multiple industries: manufacturing, energy, utilities, oil and gas, transportation, rail, metro, aviation, water treatment plant, water pipelines, wastewater management, chemical, healthcare. Uh, of course, healthcare is more specialized, but that is something that one also needs to consider. And uh, they are also OT system, but in a bit more specialized manner. So uh, what we can see is the important is something that cannot be overstated, right? And all those industries rely on OT systems to maintain the continuity of operations and, importantly, safety of the operations. And if there is a cyber attack on an OT system, it can lead to a production shutdown, equipment damage, loss of life, environmental disasters, right? And of course, loss of life is always number one, followed by number two is environmental disaster, like oil leakage or a chemical spill into fertile grounds, or a facility that is surrounded by residential area. If there's an explosion, if there's a massive explosion, as we saw in Lebanon, Beirut, in the port, uh, of course, that was not a cyber attack, but such things can easily be considered as an attack vector. It's definitely possible. All those safety incidents that we have seen, right, due to improper handling or maybe improper configuration or settings, there has been various incidents, safety incidents. All those probably could be our next cyber incident as well, caused by a cyber attack. But of course, that might sound as a bit of over exaggeration, uh, but it's definitely possible. That doesn't mean that it might happen, but it could happen, right? So we need a fine balance, right? It's not that you basically how it is done is we see the impact to our facilities and what is the cost that might be incurred, what is the reputation damage, and based on that, we take a call, we take a judgment, and we invest for the security solutions, starting with trainings and awareness and so on. So these are the key aspects that one needs to be aware of, and that's how the importance of OT cybersecurity uh, always nowadays has become a topic in the boardrooms at the CEO level or the CXO level.
Um, Thank you, John. Considering that this is a very specific field, and what I mean is that it combines both engineering and IT management, IT industry knowledge. How does one enter into the field? Do you need to have an IT background? Do you need to have an engineering background? Are those things absolutely mandatory? Could someone without this knowledge enter, and to what degree could it and could they enter? So how do you proceed? How do you become an OT security specialist? How do you become a consultant into this field?
Right. So, see, um, see, anything is possible, right? I have seen people with non-IT background, non-technical background entering into the field of cybersecurity, entering into the field of OT systems. Uh, it's all about how you use the opportunities and how you continuously learn. And of course, I understand there is a challenge, especially if you're a non-technical, not engineering background. Then for someone to understand the various OT systems and how it works and so on is definitely a challenge, but it's not impossible, right? Uh, there are two aspects to it here. One would be to understand the security concepts, the fundamentals, and IT security is definitely a good place to start. And I always suggest to people who ask me, um, first know the fundamentals, right? Uh, this certifications like CompTIA Security Plus, CompTIA Network Plus. I think they are the best certifications and training that one can do. And depending upon one's background and experience level, maybe if they are about 10 years experience, I always suggest, okay, you have been in other field for a long time, and if you want to go into cybersecurity, irrespective whether it is IT or OT, and if you're about 10 years, do CASSP, Certified Information Systems Security Professional. The reason why I suggest that is, of course, it is more IT focused, but it's a very broad coverage on 8 domains of security aspects, and that literally gives you a very structured and strong fundamentals in terms of the security. And once you have done that, certification itself is a challenge. If you achieve that, well and good, your thought process will change. But I don't stress too much on the certification. Even if you don't do the certification, if you learned all the read the books, learn it, understand it, the journey of learning itself is very important. So know the basics, know the security aspects, know the networking concepts, know system administration. So that is one part. So the second part here is understanding the OT system. So you have learned the security concepts, right? Now you have an understanding. Now you want to move into a more specialized area of OT systems, especially OT cybersecurity. So the first place, or the first thing that one needs to do is understand what OT system is all about. And uh, why do we uh, how do we I say it, um, why do we stress so much? What are the differences between IT and OT? What are the industry sectors that use OT systems? What are the different types of OT systems? And how are they architected? What are the communication protocols used? Right. So what is the network topology? How it is different from IT? What are the challenges? So these are some of the things that one needs to know. And there are a lot of resources for that, right? Free and paid, and a lot of books on OT systems, on automation engineer, on PLCs, on SCADA, on control systems. One could definitely read all that. And once they have that basic understanding, the next thing that one needs to do is uh, when we apply the security concepts into the OT systems, uh, even though the concepts is still the same, there are certain things we can do and we cannot do. So this is the major differentiator. So one, when someone understands that, I think they can be able to do a more hands-on um, work in terms of OT cybersecurity. And uh, another thing I always suggest is there's a lot of literature, videos, information articles regarding various case studies about cyber attacks on OT systems. So for a start, if someone is just getting into this field, that would be a good place to actually uh, understand what happened, how it happened, how it could have been avoided, and so on. And finally, we have this standard IEC 62443. It See, standard is for a reason, just to help all the asset owners, equipment suppliers, system integrators, and so on, service providers. Uh, it can only give you a guidance how to go about it, but how you actually do it, they don't specify in the standards. There is a reason they left it out, right? Because when one reads the standards, different people could have a different interpretation, and uh, having a particular way of doing may not work for all. So it is always out for interpretation. And finally, joining communities. There are a lot of communities, WhatsApp groups, Telegram groups, then forums, professional associations, and so on. One could join there, learn from the people, network with them on LinkedIn. That's the best way to go. Like, for example, I post a lot of topics on LinkedIn, articles, posts, maybe some videos as well. uh, that's how we learn, we share, we grow together. So I think, briefly, this is how one can go about it. I have written a lot about how you kickstart your learning with respect to OT cybersecurity. I think if one sees that, maybe reads through that, it'll save a lot of time. And uh, just want to add a little bit of motivation. The thing is, it may not be possible within one day. It might take some time. So see if this is really for you, if this is something that you really want to do. End of the day, if it makes you happy, I think it's good. So test out the waters, right? Doing expensive trainings or certifications is not going to get you the dream job that you want. People have a wrong notion that, okay, I do this certification, I can get this job. No, it doesn't work that way. You need to work hard for it. And nowadays we have a lot of GitHub repositories, we have online labs where you can develop your credentials. Once you do the simulations, once you do those labs, you get credentials. And that's a good way of showcasing your skills. And of recently, I've been seeing more OT or industrial control system labs as well. Like TriAcme has some, and there are others open source on GitHubs. Uh, of course, don't do it on a production environment. You might end up getting into trouble, and also getting the facility into a major disaster. So always do it in a lab environment. Always ask, don't assume. I think this is very important.
Thank you, John. It's those are really really valuable information. I hope that people who listen will take something with them. Last question before we finish: what is the future of OT security? What do you see in terms of technology, in terms of practice, in terms even in cyber attacks?
Right. So, of course, what I'm seeing is, um, Like we have been seeing, there has been different industrial revolutions since the last 100 years. Now we have industry 4.0. Then in the future we have industry 5.0, where uh, it'll be more connected, right? It's something called cyber physical systems, where it's more connected world, and all the manufacturing um, might be, it's already going towards the cloud, but not the whole control systems, but the monitoring, the troubleshooting, remote monitoring access, and so on. So I think this is going to happen. There's going to be a lot of virtualized controllers. Right now we have the hardware, but there are people like Siemens. Then there are other players in the market who are developing virtualized controllers. These could go on cloud. I'm not sure how exactly that might work. Of course, they bringing more additional challenges, because OT systems are more deterministic. Whatever we design happens, right? Like all these embedded devices and so on. And we do not expect any lag. But when we talk about IT, networking, cloud, there's always some lags, there are a lot of disturbance and so on. But we see a lot of edge devices. All these devices take decisions real time and transmit messages to the cloud, and finally to the OT systems. But at the moment, these devices are more like sensors, not controllers. Maybe for non-critical applications, such devices can be used. So of course, there's another challenge of OT systems and IoT. IoT and OT are not same. Just that OT, they share the common spellings, but IoT is completely different. But of course, we have industrial Internet of Things. That again is a bit of extension of the OT systems. So we have upcoming technologies from AI, machine learning. All these things will become more prevalent in industrial settings. And there has a lot of innovations happened in security solutions targeted at OT systems, right? And all these will be continually evolving. Even the 62443 standard that I highlighted earlier, it's almost 10, 12, 14 years old, and a lot of the documents are currently under revision. Probably next 2, 3 years we will see updated standards. And since they are being done at the present, where we are seeing a tremendous change, uh, so we don't know. Probably a lot could change, but ultimately whatever changes, the basics are still remain the same, right? um, like I mentioned earlier, we might have expensive hardware and software, but ultimately training, awareness, having the right policies, procedures in place is the key. And uh, irrespective of the impact of all these emerging technologies that we see, uh, I'm sure it is possible to have a very safe and cyber secured infrastructure.
John, for the conversation, for the opportunity to talk with you. It was a real pleasure for me, and I hope the people who listen to the podcast will understand. I highly recommend you visit John's LinkedIn page. He also is developing several others ICS and OT security pages, which provide a lot of content. You can see his network is really focused on this. Connect with him. He did it with me. He just gave me the opportunity to talk with him. He's open, so I would really encourage and understand that this is something which is present, but which is also coming in the future, and it will be an ever-growing topic, especially considering the convergence and everything we see. With that, I thank John, and thank you for staying until the end.